Hello everyone and welcome. So today I'm going to be drawing and painting Leaf from Animal Crossing New Leaf. This is the first video like this that I've ever made, so some of the shots are going to be a little bit off, but I hope everyone enjoys it in spite of that. So for the first drawing process, I'm going to be using a Derwent Graphic B pencil. I like this one because it's just soft enough to be good for sketching while being light enough to erase nice and easily, which is important for me when I'm painting over it and I don't want gross little pencil lines underneath. I'm also using Winsor Newton Cotman watercolour paper. I like it because it's nice and thick and it comes in a handy spiral pad, and I'll put links to both of these down below. So as you can see, I'm having a little bit of trouble getting his eye pattern right. I'm kind of struggling to get the angle and the size just perfect in comparison to the rest of his head. And I'm gonna mess this up later when I paint over it, so this whole section will have been for nothing. And I'm just adjusting his head size a little bit here. My advice for getting a likeness just right is to not be too careful when you're making your first few marks, but go back and correct your proportions and your angles over and over again. I like to keep looking away and looking back at certain areas, because if I look at one area for too long, it can be hard to see what needs fixing. The image that I'm using here is actually from one of Leaf's amiibo cards. He became one of my favourite characters in the series pretty quickly, which is saying a lot because Animal Crossing is my favourite video game series ever, and I'm attached to pretty much every character in it. I just think he's absolutely adorable and so well designed. I think a sloth would be the last animal I would think of for a gardener character, but it works so well for his personality. Now I'm moving on to drawing his body, and I'm realising that I made his arm way too big. Drawing Animal Crossing characters is always a bit weird because their bodies are so small in comparison to their heads, but I think the more you draw them, the easier it is to get those weird proportions right. You can see me measuring those proportions now. I think most of the time their bodies are about half the size of their heads, so I'm just going to try and measure that out. I also think it's very clear now how massive that arm is, but I'm going to go back and fix it pretty soon. So originally I had planned for this to come out a few weeks before E3, but there were some problems with recording. Basically I ordered a USB mic and that's not what I got. It was like a headphone jack one, it wouldn't work, and I didn't just want to use my laptop's crappy microphone, so I ordered an adapter and then blah 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 blah. It's here now, and so is Animal Crossing New Horizons, the trailer at least. I really can't explain how excited I am for this game. It looks absolutely amazing. I think it's going to become my favourite game in the series, just like New Leaf did. The weather effects, the clothing, the co-op, it all looks really good, and the next 9 months are going to hopefully fly by because I just desperately want to play it. I'd like to apologise for the very dodgy camera angle here. I don't really know what happened when I was setting up this shot, but it'll be fixed in a minute. That's my bin, a hot water bottle, and a foam rounders bat that you can see on the ground. Also, my plant looks a bit sick, but those are just a few bad leaves, and the rest of it is very healthy, especially now, because it's been a few weeks since I recorded this. Don't at me. So I'm off getting water now, and I'll point out the paint supplies that I'm using. Most are from Daler Rowney. I don't even know if I'm saying that right. It's just the way I've always pronounced it. But yeah, I'm using this watercolour pan, which I don't believe is from a specific line. It just says Daler Rowney, and I like to top up my tube of China White from the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolour line. I find I have to top up the white pan a lot since it gets so janky from all the other colours. I'm not a very neat painter, in case you couldn't tell from the pan. I'm using two brushes here. Both are from Daler Rowney, but the smaller one is from their Aquafine line, which is specifically for watercolour, and the larger one is from their Graduate line, which is a budget line. So it's nice and cheap, but it's very soft, so it works perfectly for watercolour. So for Leaf's brown fur, I'm using this sort of chocolate colour and mixing it with a bit of white to make it more pastel. I found that this is something that I do a lot when painting Animal Crossing characters. Although many of them are designed with bright rainbow colours, they're often quite subdued in pastel and appearance. And you can see that in the trailer for New Horizons quite a lot as well. I noticed some people were kind of complaining about it being like too unsaturated, but that's just kind of how it looks. I used a bit of extra water on the edges of the cheeks there to make them look nice and soft. And I'm painting some other bits of fur here, like the chest and the arms, making sure to put some shadows right under the chin, at the edge of the apron, and under his armpits and stuff. And I'm just using that chocolate colour again without the white and then blending it out a little. I'm also adding some white highlights. And the camera angle just got even worse. Wow. I found this colour to be a little bit hard to work with, and generally speaking I find any kind of fleshy tone difficult to use without it getting patchy, but given the fact that it's supposed to be fur, I'm not too mad at it. It just looks sort of textured, and the camera angle's fixed now, so that's nice. So I'm filling in his eyes now. I love painting eyes on cartoony characters like this. There's just something really satisfying about it. I'm using a very saturated black to do it, which of course means that I'm using a decent amount of water since it's watercolour, but I'm making sure to mix it very well to get all that colour into it so it's not just kind of grey. I'm also leaving those little spaces blank because he might look a bit dead otherwise, and I'm using the black to fill in the markings around his eyes. I find when a colour is this saturated I have to go back to the pan quite a lot to keep it getting streaky or dried out, so that's why you see me doing that. Now I'm doing the same on his other eye, and you'll see here that I'm messing up the shape of it a little bit. It's one of the downsides of using watercolours. They're very unforgiving, so if you make a mistake, especially with a colour as dark as this, you just have to roll with it. I think it might have been my awareness of the fact that I was filming myself doing this for the first time that made my hand a little shakier than usual. Or maybe I'm always this bad, who knows. Anyway, I've just evened it out on the other side. I wear eyeliner a lot, so I'm used to this situation. Now I'm just painting in his little claws, and I'm doing the inside of his mouth in a second, all with the same black. I find it's best not to go back and forth between black and other colours, since it has a tendency to make them go very muddy, which we don't want, so do all your black parts all in one go. And I'm doing his little green shoes, using a nice bright green for this, which I love using bright colours. And then I'm using a darker kind of pine colour to add shadows around the edges and where the folds are in the middle. And I'm using white and a little bit of yellow to add highlights. And then I'm going to use these same colours for his cap. By the way, I'm sorry if any weird background noise or like breathing or anything gets caught on this. It's my first time using this mic. So it might not sound all that great the first time, but hopefully the background music will cover it up. I don't know. Now I'm using a mix of that chocolate brown I used for the fur, plenty of white, and some kind of wine and violet colours to mix up the shade I need for the nose and lips. I'm glad I didn't need too much of this colour since it was pretty tricky to get right. Now I'm using the same mix of brown and white from before to do the fur around his face. This was probably the trickiest part of this whole image, just because I had to constantly mix up the right shade and it was such a large area. This is a common problem I run into when I'm using watercolour. Because timing is so crucial, unlike when you're using oil and you've all the time in the world before it dries, you can end up with certain areas drying out before you have the chance to blend them properly. I'm making sure to add shadows around the face portion, and again just paying special attention to my blending to make sure everything is nice and smooth and nothing is patchy and gross. And as I explained before, the forehead has gone a little bit patchy because of the drying and the mixing process, so I've just gone over it with a little bit of water on the big brush to make it all a little bit smoother. This is me just adding some more shadows around the face, just to make everything look a little bit nicer and more 3D, but still keeping it nice and cartoony. Now I'm using the same brown to paint the little buttons on his apron, and I realised, right after finishing this, that I forgot to paint the thread in the buttons. And it's been a few weeks since I did this, and I still don't think I've filled in those threads. They're just white. This has been a recurring theme for me recently. I finished painting Squirtle and posted it on Instagram and everything before I realised I left out one of the little lines on his belly. And I posted one of Bulbasaur. Noticed that I forgot to brush off a little eraser shaving right next to his eyebrow, so it looked like I had just given him 2 eyebrows. Anyway, I'm using a mix of wine and white here to paint in at the tongue, and then I'm using an extra saturated version of the wine to add shadows and the white to add highlights. And I'm just starting to add outlines to certain areas now. I've mixed up the same colour I did for the nose and mouth, but without the white to outline them, and I'm using that wine colour to outline the tongue. I'm using the chocolate brown from before to do all of the fur as well. I find that sometimes I'm a little conflicted when I'm doing watercolours, if I want to outline or if I don't. I used to outline all my watercolour paintings in like a black liner pen, but I think that outlining it in just a really saturated kind of darker version of the colour that's already there gives it that sort of cartoonish look, but it's not too like harsh like a black line. I'm just filling in the middle of the flower now and using the pine colour we used before to do the outline of the hat. And as you might have guessed, I'll be using the same one to outline the shoes. I'm using this very pretty mustard colour for Leaf's apron. Apologies for this section being kind of blurry, but I thought people might like seeing the painting happen up close and real time for a bit. So this is me just evening out the mustard colour across the whole apron. I'll start adding shadows soon, but I wanted it to be more or less the same colour before I started doing that. And again, sorry for it being very blurry. So I'm just adding some shadows around the big pocket now and around the edges of the apron. I'm also adding some around the buttons, and for all of this I'm using the same mustard colour but nice and saturated this time. Now I'm using more of an ochre colour to outline the apron and the pocket. And now I'm just going to fill in the flower, outline the shoes, his arms, his legs, and the flower. And now I'm just going to use a nice watery grey to make the shadow, and then we're done. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll be painting Isabelle in the next one, so keep an eye on the page if you'd like to see that. I'm really excited about making these videos. I'll link my Instagram down below if you'd like to see some other cool things that I've painted and drawn and made and stuff. Yeah, bye-bye.